Okay, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is Laila. Laila, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Vitali. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Layla, as one of the top remote work influencers and as a remote work coach, could you please maybe briefly introduce yourself and share your experience in this maybe journey in the world of remote work?
Absolutely. It's been quite a journey, actually. I began working remotely about almost 10 years ago. So, yeah, about nine and a half
Okay.
years ago. My background is in many things, including a bit of UX design. And so that's what I started as when I started working remotely for a company called Hano. They were a digital product design company. And I worked with them for about 2.5 years. I was based in London, and I was really interested, before even joining this first remote role, in how to work remotely for selfish reasons. I wanted to travel and work at the same time.
Okay.
And I wrote my master's thesis on how to do design thinking remotely. So at the time I was studying
Mm-hmm.
design thinking, but I couldn't understand how that could be done remotely, because generally you do it in a physical room and you have a lot of sticky notes and whiteboards and people drawing and writing and putting things on walls. And that's how I got to know the software called Mural, which is where I work now. So I
Mm-hmm.
used Mural long before joining them. And then
Mm-hmm. Okay.
eventually I joined Mural's customer success company. So I was working with their customers and creating blog posts for them, and really, I tested Mural so often for workshops and teaching other people how, especially designers, how to work remotely, that by the time I joined Mural, I was very familiar with this online whiteboard
Mm-hmm.
for visual collaboration. So I've been now at Mural for 5 years. Since then, I have worked in the people operations team, and now I'm in the marketing team as head of new ways of working.
Okay. Okay. And speaking of that, this new role, head of new ways of working at Mural,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds awesome. But can you tell us what it really means? I mean, what are you doing there in
Yeah,
this role?
it's a new role and it's a new team within marketing. So I'm part of the thought leadership team together with Jim Callback and Mark Tippin. And the three of
Hmm.
us are each experts in their own area. So Jim is, he's written a number of books on jobs to be done. So he's the expert in that. The Mark Tippin is a fantastic facilitator and very well informed on artificial intelligence. And my space has been more remote work. Obviously, we all know how to work remotely, and we all know a little bit about AI and a little bit about jobs to be done, but
Hmm.
each one has their sphere. So the idea of putting us together, so previously we were in separate teams, but
Hmm.
we've collaborated before. So the idea is to bring us together to be the thought leaders that will create a movement of people who are big fans of collaborating online, visually, big
Hmm.
fans of Mural, and continuing to put content out there as we already have in the past, but doing it in a more strategic way. So whether that's writing blog posts and articles or podcast interviews like this one, or conferences,
Hmm.
public speaking, where we're showing people more information about what we're experts in, right? We're teaching people and we're creating this movement, also with our community, with our customers. And so supporting, it's not just about helping, we're not pitching Mural necessarily. We're not
Hmm.
like sales people. It's more about showing the rest of the world what's out there in our areas of influence, and
Hmm.
and bringing people along with us for this journey, and getting to network, getting to create experiments, getting to co-create sessions. So again, because my expertise is more in remote work, and also, slowly that becomes also hybrid work and asynchronous collaboration, all that's involved under that. That's why my title is not just head of remote, but
Hmm.
rather head of new ways of working, because the way that everybody is working is changing so quickly. And that would also include maybe topics like the 4-day work week, like
Hmm.
what are these new ways of working that knowledge workers are going towards? And
Hmm.
what do we all want to learn more about? And I'm also learning new things. It's not like I'm an expert in everything, of course not, because there's
Hmm.
new things popping up, but it's being on that that wave of, before the trends even start, knowing what's about to come and being able to
Okay.
research and inform people, hey, this is what's happening and this is how it can impact all of us.
Okay. In maybe let's do this one step back
Mm-hmm.
um, and talk a bit about remote first mindset, remote culture, right? You
Yeah.
talk about this a lot, and just like those words are like a mantra for me in my daily work, right? But
Mm-hmm.
for those who are not really familiar with this remote work culture itself, remote work mindset itself, right? Can you please unpack this term for them?
Yeah. So remote work, it's interesting because it's called different things also in different languages. So I speak Italian and French. For example, in Italian they call it smart working, uh,
Okay, really
right? Which for me, smart
cool.
working is a great word, but it doesn't automatically make me think of remote. So when I tell people in
Right.
Italian I'm doing remote work, they say, "Oh, you're doing smart working." So that's interesting. In France,
Mm-hmm.
they've also called it télétravail, which is more about working with technology and like from far away. So in
Mm-hmm.
English, I find that remote work is a little bit more specific. At least to me, it sounds a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more specific and really goes to show um, a person or a team of people who are not working in an office, right? I prefer the word distributed because it's a little bit more broad, but remote is really, you don't go to the office and you don't see your colleagues in the physical space where you're working from. And and remote first is an approach whereby a company is really changing all their practices, all their strategies, all their policies for their employees. Everything is done in a very intentional way to
Mm-hmm.
enable their employees and their teams to work remotely better. But what's
Mm-hmm.
happened during the pandemic, at least this is what I've observed, is that many companies were not equipped or prepared to have their teams working remotely. They didn't have the best practices in place. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the workflows and so forth. They didn't have the policies. And so for them, remote work is just, well, you're going to work from home, but everything else that was in place before when you're in the office is still what we're using as our default way of working. And it's not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
inclusive, right? It's made
Right.
for people who go and commute to the office. So remote first has this additional aspect of being much more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
It's made to support you while you're working remotely. So to be a bit more specific, you're going to have tools, we could use Zoom or Google Meets or something like that, but tools that will allow us to see each other, visually collaborate. And that's like, people get that. They understand the tools, but then it's about the policies, right? So what are the HR policies that are put in place? What are the best practices that you have around communication, how you'll build trust with your team, and all those kind of things need to be considered and applied, not just considered. They
Mm-hmm.
need to be considered, created, ideally documented somewhere,
Right.
shared, and role modeled by the
Mm-hmm.
leaders of the company, by the managers, to really create this remote first, inclusive work environment that is supportive of you working from, could be home, it could be a co-working space, it could be a number of things, but not working in the office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. And let's maybe talk a bit about this hybrid, right? Or model, right? You also talk about this a lot. I know that, but uh, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders specifically, like that I am in touch with, that I talk to on a daily basis, they
Mm.
having this either in office culture, right, or remote, or remote first, remote only,
Mm-hmm.
model that is
Mm-hmm.
more preferable for them, but not a kind of hybrid model. They kind of argue that it can negatively impact the company culture when you have this hybrid model, when you have some guys who are in office, right, and there's some kind of remote. So considering your expertise,
Mm.
could you please share with us the this unique challenges you have faced when managing and communicating within hybrid teams specifically?
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned how hybrid is now seen as something that is more difficult to put in place. It always has been difficult. but usually people were saying that about remote culture. And now that hybrid is becoming more common, they're like, actually remote we can even handle, but what's really complicated is hybrid. So it feels like every time there's a new model, of course it's going to be more difficult because it's more unfamiliar to us. So the hybrid work environment is essentially a mix or hybrid of people both working in person from the office and people working not in the office. Again, that could be a number of places. But also there's a way of looking at hybrid, and I want to just explain it before I go into the challenges, where hybrid is not just the physicality, right? Are we physically located or not? But it also, are we working synchronously or asynchronously due to time zones, due to where we're located and so forth, and the best practices we have. So it becomes an increasingly complex work environment where you have to adapt to different modes of working and be, I heard this term the other day from Sasha Connor, who's a consultant also in this space, and she was talking about being omnimodal. So being able to adapt and switch contexts, different modes of working, whether you're in person and remote, in person and synchronous, remote and synchronous, in person async, remote async, and all that, hybrid, non-hybrid. So when you have all these different characteristics put together, you realize that you have to kind of cater for culture or nurture this culture for people who are in completely different environments. And so that's where the challenge lies. That's why I believe, and I think many people are noticing, that hybrid is the most complex way of working, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible to solve or find things that work. It just means that it's going to take us a bit longer to get there. So primarily, some challenges that come up, is that people who work in a hybrid mode, usually the people who are going to the office tend to be favored when it comes to building connections or being, there's this kind of bias as well. If you're more present, your manager sees you more often. So it's more likely that you will get the promotion or you will get asked to lead a specific project because we see your face regularly. And so another interesting thing I heard recently, actually at the Running Remote conference, was wherever your leaders are, whether that's remote or whether that's at the office, that's where people will gravitate towards, and that's kind of where the culture lies. So maybe, ideally to solve for that, what would be great in a hybrid work environment to create a better culture is to have leaders really split their time in a hybrid way, right? Either it's one individual does both, or you have literally some leaders are only remote and some leaders are only in person, to not create, this kind of like everybody's gravitating towards that focal point. And so what happens also is when you have a group of people who are privileged in a way of, this kind of proximity, and we talk about proximity bias and recency bias, for example. Like the person you saw most recently is the person you will remember the most, and therefore you will collaborate with them more often. If you're not physically close to the office, or if you haven't interacted with those people recently, you slowly get excluded. And it's also about, the experience over time, but it can start with the experience. For example, in a meeting, is the meeting set up so that everybody, whether they're joining from the office or remotely, feel like they can have a say and collaborate? Or is the space where you're having the office, like I have friends who work in companies that are remote friendly. So like they're open to remote work. So they are working hybrid essentially. But then when they go to the office and there's a meeting and then one or two people are remote, my friends in the office get really annoyed. And they're thinking, why the hell did I have to come to the office if at the end of the day, those two people didn't come? So it starts creating this kind of tension, right? That friction. And at that point, it's like, well, it would have been easier if we were all remote, then I wouldn't have come to the office. And so I think we're just not, the challenge is that we're not quite there yet when it comes to the most essential interactions, like we all, many of us think we have too many meetings. That's also another problem, right? That came with the pandemic, is we were trying to recreate this like in-person environment. So let's have meetings all the time so we can see each other all the time. And I think with hybrid, that's another thing. It's like you're trying to bring all the people in person and remote together, but it's not by trying to bring everyone together all the time, you're actually not satisfying anyone. And then it's like, how do we do social building? So another topic that came up during a panel that I was in at Running Remote was the importance of offsites to meet people, all of us in person again, to socialize and build those relationships, but also how the office has now become the onsite. So the onsite of the office is becoming the new offsite. So the offices are not just used for working, but actually they're increasingly becoming places of social interaction where people just come to hang out and get their dose of, okay, I've interacted with my teammates and I can go home and actually get work done. So I know I said a lot of things there, but I think that just goes to show that we're really in the midst of trying to solve all these challenges.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. And you touched this a bit, but I would like to go a bit deeper. So, speaking about remote collaboration, maybe not remote, but this hybrid collaboration, right? So, what tips do you have for effective teamwork in a this virtual environment, and how can maybe tools like for example Mural, right, simplify this process?
When it comes to remote collaboration, I think a good starting point would be to get everyone in your team synchronously together, right? Whether that's in person or remote, whatever way you want to do it. Get everyone together and first understand how are people feeling about the way that they're currently working. So what is the status of collaboration almost, right? Let's measure that. Let's analyze that. Let's understand. So again, I told you at the beginning that I started writing about design thinking, and I still apply the design thinking mindset to everything I do. So it's first understanding and having empathy for the people that you're trying to solve the problem for. And once you have an understanding of that, okay, let's look at what solutions are needed, and for some, maybe it's like, oh, we have all the tools, but our workflows are a little bit messy. So we need to agree on how can we improve our workflows so that we don't work in silos and we communicate effectively and we just like all follow the same process. For others, it may be, actually, we have too many tools. So how can we reduce the tools and just pick a few? That's like a common thing, right?
That's true.
Especially these days when companies are trying to lower their budget, one of the first things they're going to do, unfortunately, there's been layoffs, but another thing they're doing also is cutting budget for software, right? For tools. Right. And we'll often find duplicates, or we'll be like, well, our engineering department is using this, but our people operations is using this. Is there any way that we could, make a compromise and we just all use the same one? Sometimes you can't, and sometimes you can. And other times it will be, for example, how can we, when we're collaborating remotely, how can we improve our internal communications and have be more updated more often about what our leadership team, what our leaders are working on? How can we see them if they're remote and they're very busy people? How can we get updates? Maybe it's through an employee newsletter. Maybe it's through an all hands company meeting. Maybe it's through, they make like a weekly video where they give updates and we see different leaders. So when it comes to remote collaboration, I think first study, analyze, understand how people feel, what's working and what's not working. And then from there, focus, for each company will be different. And one thing, when it comes to like the more, I say basic, but it's not that basic because I take things for granted at this point. But I find it very helpful to create a playbook of how you collaborate and what are the best practices at your company. So we at Mural have a remote work playbook. GitHub is very well known for their open source playbook online. Anybody can download those. Theirs is massive, so you may want to, really take out only what you need and create
GitHub or GitLab.
Sorry, GitLab. That's what I meant. Yeah. Thank you. So if you want to look at GitLabs, that's a great example. But maybe theirs is too overwhelming to take in all at once. So we have our own playbook. We also, what we did for some of our teams, which helped a lot, was having a communication charter. So communication charter essentially is going through every single tool that you have for communication, making an audit, and then for each tool, agreeing, aligning on how are we going to use this tool? What is it for? Is it for internal communication, external use, Are we going to use it frequently, less frequently? What kind of what kind of collaboration happens in this tool? And by doing that with all your tools and agreeing this is how we're going to use it, you'll start to automatically, slowly, gradually work better. So to give you an example, and this still happens at Mural sometimes, some people will prefer emails and other people will write in Slack and other people write in Asana, the same type of content. So it's about, let's align and let's not try to duplicate this kind of conversation everywhere.
Right.
Let's, okay, email is for this and Slack is only for like urgent things. And then project management stuff goes in Trello or Asana or something like that, or in Mural, you know? And this is what happens. Like for us, we scaled quite fast. We went through a hyper growth period during the pandemic, growing from like 100 employees to 1,000 in basically a year and a half or 2 years, which was so fast that we were struggling to keep up with how we should work and communicate. So now that we're not growing in that way anymore, we've slowed down a bit. We have the time to really focus on like the operations, right, side of things, and agree on how can we use all these tools. And so to answer your next question, which is about how can Mural help? Well, Mural is again, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's an online whiteboard for visual collaboration. You can use it in a number of ways, whether that's, the first idea somebody might think is, oh, I can brainstorm, I can visually, share my ideas. Yes. And you can also, plan big roadmaps and strategic plans, and you can do workshops in them, and you can document in it if you want. We did our communication charter for the people operations team. We did it in a Mural. It's a live document that you can keep going into and continue changing and adapting. So I think for remote teams to have not just like a knowledge base, like a wiki where it's mainly text based, but having something very visual, it's proven that we also are very visual creatures and we remember things very visual, and it's very interactive. It's very organic. So it's not just like it's written in this document. It looks like you can't change it. I mean, anybody can go into a Mural depending on permissions and adapt and change things. So I think it allows people to collaborate in a more, not just visual way, but in a more like organic way, and keep that conversation going in whatever it is that they're using Mural for. It could be a meeting, it could be to work synchronously, it could be for async collaboration, but it's an extremely flexible tool for that.
Yeah, but from my experience, the biggest challenge for example, for my company is not to put up those documents together, but just to make people, update them, follow them, read them. So that's the biggest challenge, I guess, in my case. Okay, so probably my last question. I know that I also have this global company, right, myself, and I know it's not always walk in the park, to build a distributed team. So with that, do you have maybe 3 key pieces of advice for those who are trying to build this distributed remote team from scratch, who are new to this approach?
I would start out, so 3 advice. First thing is look at other companies who are doing it already and see, especially if they have a blog or if they have content out there, resources which can help you. So I mentioned before, GitLab's not GitHub, GitLab's playbook, or, there are blog posts, but it's great if you can get the more chunky kind of resource. So like Workplaces is another great platform to look at. They offer training for remote teams or grow remote as well, for companies who are starting remotely, and look at what kind of free content do they have already and start having a look at that. And so you don't have to immediately pay for somebody to help you out. That's going to help you. Tip number 2, have an open mindset when it comes to learning this new way of working. It's going to take some time. So more than open, actually, I would say, be experimental. And I think that we are often too quick as humans, especially in this environment where everything has to work fast and we need to go and be productive. When it comes to changing the way that we interact and the way that we work, It's
Mhm.
about building new habits, and that is going to take time. As anyone knows, if they're trying to build a new routine, even in their personal life, like I'm trying to go to the gym more regularly or things like that, it takes time before you start seeing
Right.
the impact. Like I'm very impatient. So if I go to the gym 3 times and I don't see what I'm, some kind of like muscle tone or
Hmm.
something, I get impatient and think this is not working, but it's actually going to take me a while. And that's the same with building a new remote company. You have the company, the business model that you're trying to look at, but you're also looking at the whole ways of working and engaging with your team. So be patient and try things and pilot things. And then if that doesn't work, take the learnings,
Hmm.
iterate and do it in a new way. And then my third piece of advice would be to prioritize culture, because that's going to make all the difference in
Okay.
how people work together. So by that, what I mean is don't just look again at what are the tools we need and the best practices and this. That's all culture, but culture is more than just, some people will think, oh, it's just the fun times, right? It's just when people come together and socialize and have a social hour. It's not just that. It's
Hmm.
everything. It's how do the leaders role model how we should work here at this place, and who or how many people, I mean, everybody's involved in culture, but are there any ambassadors at your company who are very passionate about culture, who can come together and meet regularly and say, okay, these are the things that are working, these are things that we can change. So these could be your culture ambassadors, or I like to call them culture carriers. If you can hire somebody for that role, like that was my previous role, even better.
Hmm.
But if you can't, there are probably pockets of people in your organization already who can do that. And ideally, we want them to be able to communicate directly with the leaders, right? And give them, and to have leaders with an open mindset where they say, okay, this is the feedback we're getting, this is what we're hearing. Maybe sometimes leaders are so busy, doing other things that they may be a little bit disconnected from
Hmm.
how people feel at the company. So having
Right.
those people being able to say, hey, here's how you can help kind of like executively sponsor certain initiatives, and having somebody in the executive team being present at some events or mentioning an event, it shows everybody else like, hey, we should all be involved in this initiative,
Hmm.
because our CEO or somebody else in the C-suite is involved. When you don't have that, you are making it harder for people to feel like they have permission to do certain things. So whatever we
Hmm.
see our leaders do, we feel like, okay, if they do that, we can do that, right? But if like they never take holidays, well, I'm not going to feel comfortable taking holidays. Or if they're never vulnerable, I'm not going to be vulnerable. And so you're not building this psychologically safe work environment. So I
Right.
think that culture aspect is very important, to be intentional about it, to nourish that and to see
Hmm.
who can help you out. It's not just one person, it's a group of people.
Yeah. Can't agree more. Okay, I guess we're good. So thanks a lot, Lila, for sharing your insights on remote first culture, on these challenges and obstacles of remote teams. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time. We wish you all the best in your journey.
Thank you so much. And we'll stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
Thanks a lot.